This is the Architect Exam Podcast, the official podcast of the Young Architect Academy.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Architect Exam Podcast. I'm Michael Rasika, and today I have with me my very special guest and friend and architect, Emily Hobbs.
Hello.
Guys, I told Emily I needed her to join me to record a podcast and that she didn't need to do anything ahead of time to just show up. And the funny thing is, Emily has no idea why she's here today. And I thought it'd be fun to have her as my audience and to help make this podcast more entertaining. So Emily, surprise, you're not just a guest, you're going to be my real-time audience.
Oh, wow. Lucky me. That's quite the ambush. You said just show up. So here I am. Here I am getting volunteered now. But what are we going to be talking about today? I'm ready for anything that you have planned.
Okay, so today on the podcast, we're going to talk about the pre-construction activities, specifically around construction evaluation section 1. The purpose of this podcast is to break down what makes up CE section 1. And you know, Emily, I was looking at the CE exam the other day while I was talking to the boot campers, and I realized something about the Young Architect Academy. It's that we did a really amazing job of breaking down the objectives in our CE 101 course, but we never really looked at CE from the section perspective. So I thought, hey, that would actually make some really good, useful podcast content because there's so many people studying for these exams who just really want to understand what's going to be on the test and to better understand NCARB's, logic behind how these things got put together. And so we're going to take a big picture view of what CE Section 1 is today. And this is also going to have another benefit of helping folks who didn't pass the CE exam, because when you fail, NCARB doesn't tell you which questions you got wrong. They just say, hey, you failed Section 1. So there are all these people out there online asking, what the hell's CE Section 1 about? So today we're going to break that down at a very high level.
That's a great approach. And to add on to that, whether you're studying for the CE exam or maybe you've already taken it and you don't quite understand where you went wrong on it, if you were struggling through it. So if you're just trying to better understand the exam, this I'm sure will serve as a great overview of all the items that everyone should keep in mind while studying for this division.
All right, before we dive in, let's clarify how the architect exam is structured. The ARE is broken down into different divisions or exams, as we call them, 6 exams. Each exam is made up of multiple sections, and each section contains multiple objectives. So understanding this hierarchy is important because when NCARB gives you feedback on what you failed, they typically identify it at the section level, like section 1, not the specific objective levels. And one of the things I always say is that if you're not studying NCARB's objectives and are really clear about what the scope of the test is, you're not actually studying for the architect exam. I'm not sure what you're studying, but they're testing you on those objectives, and you should be very clear about what those objectives are. And when NCARB writes the actual questions for these exams, they're using these objectives and sections and thinking about this stuff, so it doesn't make sense not to be looking at this information. It's actually the most important information out of everything you could be studying.
Right. It's straight from the source. It's straight from NCARB's mouth. They've written those objectives, so you should definitely study them.
So when it comes to breaking down objectives and sections and exams, I always like to start with the big picture and work our way into the details. And I want to start by looking at NCARB's definition of what the construction evaluation exam is. And so Emily, I had this crazy idea. I'm going to be reading NCARB's words. And since I didn't write this, these aren't my words, this is NCARB's words. I found this really I think it's Baroque classical music that I'm going to play whenever I read NCARB's words. And I want you to imagine that I'm going to put on my bow tie and top hat just to fit the scene. All right, so this exam will assess objectives related to construction, contract administration, and post-occupancy evaluations of projects. This division will focus on issues related to bidding and negotiation processes, support of the construction process, and the evaluation of completed projects. Candidates must demonstrate an understanding of and abilities in construction contract execution, construction support services, including construction observation and shop drawing or submittal review, payment request processing, and project closeout. In addition, candidates must also demonstrate an understanding and abilities in project evaluation of integrated building systems and their performance. Construction evaluation is divided into 4 sections. Section 1 is pre-construction activities, which is what we're breaking down today. The next section, section 2, is construction observation. Section 3, administrative procedures and protocols. And section 4 is project closeout and evaluation. So what does this mean? Basically, CE covers what happens after the design is complete. It's all about the drawings are done. Drawings are done, the designs are done, and CE is about bidding, it's about procurement, it's about starting construction and getting to substantial completion. What happens after substantial completion, the post-occupancy follow-up. CE is all about seeing that the design is being executed and implemented. It's about focusing on responsibilities and quality control. It's transitioning mentally from being a designer to being a project advocate and the owner's representative. It's about understanding real-world applications with construction documentation and managing the project's execution. It's about ensuring the contractor is building what was designed and specified in the documents, documenting the decisions, the changes, and progress throughout the entire project, and evaluating the building's performance after it's been built to make sure it meets the owner's needs. CE is about learning how construction documents translate the design into a reality for your client. Construction documents are like recipes, except if you forget an ingredient, it costs $100,000 to get it fixed.
Yeah, it's a very expensive recipe to mess up. And I think it's also important to say, just as architects and soon to be architects, that we don't just create our drawings and our design and then hand them over to the contractor and hope for the best. This phase is really important. The construction evaluation phase is very important because we've put in so much time and energy into those construction documents, and we need to be closely tied into what actually happens physically on the site. So we need to be very invested in that process from drawing to reality.
Exactly. And that's NCARB's definition of the whole test.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, your guide to passing the ARE.
Hey guys, since this podcast is designed to be enjoyed while you're on the move, we know you might not be able to take notes on all this valuable CE exam info we are discussing. But don't worry. After recording this podcast, Layla sat down, listened to it, and wrote up some fantastic notes that we formatted into a handy 2-pager PDF. Just visit youngarchitect.com/preconstruction to grab your free CE Section 1 notes to print and add to your study materials. All right, now back to our Preconstruction podcast. Now let's move on and talk about what Section 1 is. As I mentioned earlier, the architect exam is broken into different exams, which are made up of different sections, and each section has multiple objectives. All right, for Section 1, let me put on my top hat and let's cue up that music. NCARB says, in this section, you'll focus on the construction planning and activities that occur prior to the start of construction. And that's it. That's all they give us. So Section 1 is really about the sweet spot between when the design is done, but before the construction actually begins. It sets the foundation for the project's future success. There's a lot of decisions that happen during the pre-construction part that will affect the schedule, the outcome, and the execution of that contract. And pre-construction is that moment that establishes the roles, relationships, responsibilities, and expectations between everyone on the project team, from the architect to the client, to the owner, to the subcontractors, to the consultants, to everyone who's involved during construction. And so pre-construction phase defines contractual obligations before construction is about to begin. So how does this translate to studying for the CE exam? Section 1 tests your understanding of planning and decision-making before construction begins. Section 1 ends where Section 2 begins. Section 2, which is construction observation. Once the construction starts, you're moving into Section 2. So Section 1 makes up about 17 to 25% of the CE exam. It's made up of 3 divisions, which we're going to talk about in a second. So Objective 1.1 is it's really about understanding the architect's various roles depending on the delivery methods. 1.2, it's about evaluating and selecting the right contractors for the project. And 1.3 is all about implementing cost control measures. I'd say some of the key topics that come up with these 3 objectives across all 3 of them are project delivery methods, preparing bid packages, procurement, contractor evaluation, cost control strategies, contract management, and the architect's role during this phase of the project.
I think it's smart to go through this section by each of those objectives. It can be tempting just to kind of look at CE as a whole and talk about it as a whole, but this would be a good bite-sized approach of breaking down each objective. That way, if maybe you took CE and you didn't do well in one section, this can be a focused approach to target what to study next.
Yeah. When I want to zoom in even closer, that's the section. with the three objectives, I want to look at each objective. And I kind of want to do it on a high level. I mean, Emily and I could spend hours talking about each one of these objectives. And it's actually Lorenzo helped me make the CE 101 course. But so me and Lorenzo spent hours talking about the the CE objectives in our CE 101 course. But today, let's just do a quick high level overview on what makes up each objective. All right. So objective 1.1 is interpret the architect's roles and responsibilities during pre-construction based on delivery method. That's their title, and here's their description. And NCARB says, understanding key elements of bidding is an important aspect of pre-construction activities. This includes the required bidding documents, typical procedures for distributing documents, the pre-bid meeting, the qualification of bidders, the selection of contractors, and applicable standards for AIA documents. Contractors' responsibilities for each of these may vary depending on the project delivery type. All right, let's unpack that. Guys, project delivery methods is a recurring topic that comes up over and over and over on all three of these pro practice exams, PCM, PJM, and CE. I think each one of those exams has at least one or two objectives related to project delivery methods. And that's one of the things we actually hammer on really hard in the ARE bootcamp is making sure that everyone in pro practice bootcamp understands project delivery methods because it just comes up in so many different places. And this objective is really about understanding the architect's responsibilities across all the different delivery methods during the pre-construction phase. Whether you're using a design bid build, a design build, a construction manager, the integrated project delivery, the bridging, there's like 5 or 10 delivery methods. And understanding everyone's different responsibilities and how they shift and change and how all these parties are contractually tied together is what NCARB is getting at right here. So I'd say the key concepts or topics for objective 1.1 is, bidding documents preparation, getting the invitation to bid, instructions to bidders, making sure your construction bidding documents are all aligned. It's managing the bid process, the pre-bid meetings, the site visits, dealing with questions from bidders. I'd also add like procurement methods affecting the architect's role, unknowing your AIA documents for the different delivery methods, the Division 1 specifications, getting clear about what's in those Division 1s, and how and why they use addendas in the bidding process. And lastly, how and why addenda gets used during the bidding process. So in summary, I'd say objective 1.1 is really testing your understanding of how the architect's role adapts based on contractual relationships and the project delivery methods during the pre-construction phase. And architect's responsibility is like a game of hot potato. They change hands depending on which delivery method you choose.
Right. And no two projects are the same, right? So therefore, your project delivery method isn't always the same. It's based on what type of project you're working on. So a quick example of that is, traditionally a lot of projects use design, bid, build as a project delivery method. So the architect's role may actually be finding bidders and kind of navigating the bidding process through multiple bidders. But alternatively, if you're working on a different project delivery method, for example, design build, where the architect and the contractor are actually working together from day one, even, through the design process, you get to skip that whole bidding phase. So things are, different based on what the project type is and what that delivery method is. And you're not always just going through that traditional process. So understand, as an architect and for the exam, understanding the role of the architect and all of the parties and how that plays out is crucial for, this division.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. All right, let's break down objective 1.2 and let's cue up that music. Objective 1.2, analyze criteria for selecting contractors. NCARB says you will need to be able to establish the criteria for reviewing contractors' bids, including accuracy and completeness. Based on these criteria, you will need to be able to evaluate contractors' bids and compare contractors' qualifications to each other. All right, let's break this down. This objective is about choosing a contractor and evaluating bids. And are these bids responsive? Are the bidders responsible? What's the contractor selection method? Are we using low bid, best value, qualification-based selection? I'd say for, CE objective 1.2, the key concepts here are contractors' qualifications. Can they be bonded? We just published a podcast about construction bonds. If you haven't listened to it, I recommend it. But can the contractor be bonded? Do they have experience? What's their past performance? What's their safety record? What's their workload? What else are they working on? Do they even have time to do this project? How's the bid evaluation? Is the math on the bids, did they do their math right? Did they fill out the paperwork appropriately? Is this a public project? Is it a private project? I spent a lot of time making a podcast about that topic too, because is it a library for the city of Springfield, or are you doing a single family home with a private residence? Depending on whether your client's public or private, it opens a can of worms in either direction. And that changes the variables of so many other things from a project management perspective. This objective also gets into, was there a pre-qualification for the contractors before they actually bid this project? How are we calculating the lowest bidder? If there were alternates, which alternates are going to be accepted and which ones aren't? Making sure that the right bidder is selected from all the return bids based on the qualifications and price. There's many different pricing models from bidding. Is it a lump sum, the cost per square foot, unit pricing, getting clear about what those are and how they work, why to use one in one situation and another in another. And I think it's like identifying which contractors best match the specific project requirement. So I'd say in summary, objective 1.2 is really about testing your ability to systematically evaluate contractors using an objective criteria.
Right. And to just further echo your message, I know you went into a lot of this with your episode on private projects versus public projects. But just to reiterate, for example, on a private project, you would actually pick your contractors and change the variables because on a private project, you might not have as strict as of a budget. So maybe you're not obligated to always choose the lowest bid. Alternatively, on a public project, you are using public money and public funding. So oftentimes, if not all the time, you are forced to choose the lowest bidder. And on a public project, the contractor might also be required to be bonded. So those are some of the variables that start to change your contractor selection based on your project type. So try to think of it that way. What is the criteria by which you're evaluating those contractors for the appropriate job type, the job size, the job budget, and just knowing how all that criteria is going to guide you to find the right contractor for the job.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That was like one of the things I even brought up in that public versus private podcast is how if the contractor selection is going to be, we're going to take the lowest bid and hire that contractor, like how the documents are put together becomes a completely different ball game versus if you're working with a contract, like a privately hired contractor or a contractor you've worked with before. Because I always felt like when I worked for the government, the contractors it was a game of how can we get the lowest bid and find mistakes or leave things out and then come back and make up for it as a change order later. And so it kind of creates a different methodology about how you put your construction documents together because, you leave the hinges off the doors, you're going to get a door that doesn't have hinges. Whereas, a normal contractor would be like, well, we got to hang them up on the wall somehow, it really changes a lot of things. All right, let's break down objective 1.3. So objective 1.3, analyze aspects of the contract or design to adjust project costs. All right, so NCARB says here, you must evaluate and prioritize opportunities to reduce the project cost, scope, quality, or schedule. This will include consideration of the contractual implications of the changes, sustainability, and life cycle cost goals, and the impact on project design and overall budget. All right, let's unpack that. And I'd say right out of the gate, the first concept here is value engineering. Understanding what that means as a systematic approach of providing necessary functions at a lower cost. Value engineering isn't just about chopping scope out of your project. It's systematically going through and adding value while reducing costs. It's about maintaining quality, evaluating function, and making cost adjustments without destroying the function, materials, or design intent. It's also about understanding contract mechanisms to control costs. Things like using alternates or allowances, creating a menu of opportunities to control costs on the project, understanding the balance between controlling cost and complicating the bidding process. Like if you give them too many alternates and allowances, the bidders get frustrated and it just makes everything more expensive. What's that balance? Preventing scope creep and taking into account the life cycle costs of changes to the long-term costs. Life cycle costs are like buying shoes. That cheap pair might look good in the store, but 6 months later, you're paying for new insoles, replacements, and possibly a podiatrist. But also add to, understanding contractual implications of design changes, controlling costs through different delivery methods, implementing value engineering strategies when the bids exceed the budget, using allowances to address undefined elements in documentation, and understanding unit pricing for potential quantity changes. I'd say, in summary, Objective 1.3 is about testing your ability to strategically identify and implement cost saving measures that maintain project quality and performance while understanding the contractual implications of these adjustments.
Right. And to throw in my 2 cents on Objective 1.3, value engineering and looking for potential cost savings or allowances or any substitutions, this is happening before construction and before bidding. So you're doing this value engineering exercise as an architect and on the design team to find those potential savings or to find alternatives to the design. And then those savings or the value of those costs will be priced during the bidding process. So again, in this exercise, you're giving those alternates and substitutions in the discovery of value engineering to the contractor who's putting the bid together. And the contractor may know where there are some areas for contingencies, and there might be a little bit of wiggle room and opportunity for savings or allowances in the budget. So keep in mind that this exercise, this value engineering, it's happening before construction. This is not the time for change orders. This isn't, this isn't after the contract is signed. This is looking for those opportunities before the contract has been signed. And you're able to really define the areas where there might be some variation in the design in order to achieve the project budget.
Emily, I remember when I learned that value engineering was about removing costs but adding value, because I always thought it was kind of like, how do we make it cheaper? Who cares?
Right.
Let's make it cheaper. But it's really about being strategic about it, and that was like a big aha moment for me when I figured that out.
Yeah. And the contractors want to see that intention too.
Mhm.
They'll just bid whatever you give them if you don't show any substitutions or alternatives. But if you show an alternative, it actually allows again for that wiggle room and that creativity to maybe solve a problem a more efficient and effective way.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, your guide to passing the ARE.
Hey guys, since this podcast is designed to be enjoyed while you're on the move, we know you might not be able to take notes on all this valuable CE exam info we are discussing. But don't worry. After recording this podcast, Layla sat down, listened to it, and wrote up some fantastic notes that we formatted into a handy 2-pager PDF. Just visit youngarchitect.com/preconstruction to grab your free CE Section 1 notes to print and add to your study materials. All right, now back to our Preconstruction podcast. All right, so those are the 3 objectives that make up Section 1. And next, I wanted to talk about some of the common mistakes people make with the Section 1 objectives and just how they think about these things incorrectly. I came up with 10 ideas when I was looking at those objectives. The first is not getting clear about the different project delivery methods and how the roles, relationships, and responsibilities change from method to method. The second is not properly understanding the public bid process. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes with a publicly bid project, making sure that all the rules are followed. And so if you've never worked on a publicly bid project, it might take some time to get up to speed with what has to go down and how to make sure everything is done legally and fair, and it's a equal playing field for all the different bidders. The third is thinking that value engineering is just cost cutting, which we were just talking about. The fourth is not understanding contractual obligations when the bids exceed the budget. So what does that mean? So all the bids came back and exceeded the budget. So the documents need to be revised. Now, why do they need to be revised? And did the architect make a mistake, or was something else happen? And is the architect going to be paid for their work of revising those documents? Maybe, maybe not, depending as to the reason why everything came back. So getting clear about that. The fifth is believing that the architect makes the final contractor selection, when in reality, we're just assisting the owner. We're helping the owner make a decision. It's the owner's decision to make, not ours, not the architect's. The sixth is overlooking ethical responsibilities during bidding. Especially if it's a public bid project, the contractors are not allowed to talk to the architect, and everything has to go through procurement to make sure that none of these bidders have an unfair, so they're all on an equal playing field. No one has an unfair advantage. The seventh would be assuming that public and private projects follow the same procurement rules. We were talking about that a second ago. I'd say check out my podcast on that and how things are different with the public and private. The eighth is not properly understanding life cycle costs. The ninth would be not understanding how addendas work and how they modify a set of construction documents. And my 10th is confusing basic services with additional services with a supplemental services in the B101 and knowing what the different services are in the architect's contract.
Yeah, and I think a good way to think about these kind of common mistakes and trying to wrap your mind around that is just put yourself in the real life situation as a practicing architect. As an architect, your client is trusting you in making their vision come true and kind of helping them navigate the process with the project budget that they've provided and the project program, right? So even if through the design process and design phase, maybe your client starts adding more and more and more to the project, maybe there's some scope creep happening, but you as the licensed professional really have to be consciously aware of what that project budget is and really be informing them and just letting them know anything they're requesting or anything they need, how that's changing or informing the project budget, because you are really tasked with making sure those items are always aligned. You don't want to get to the bidding phase of the project and all the bids exceed the budget substantially because you truly, as a responsibly licensed architect, you can't just throw your hands up at the air and say, well, that's not my problem that we exceeded, the budget with all the bids. That's what you wanted. You added all these things to the project. Like, that's really not the responsible thing to do. You're really tasked with, not only are you balancing all of these things as the architect of the project and the design, but you really have to reel in your client and the project owner and offer them design solutions that they want and can also stay within their budget. And this is something that NCARB is also trying to teach us through taking the exams, right? So you are the professional that has the knowledge to balance all those plates, and they're trusting you with that. And, it's really just about being responsible with all of that knowledge. And we are the curators of this project from start to finish. So ultimately, we are the ones that are in the most control of that budget and of that design. So again, just to reiterate, it's a bit of a balancing act between the client, the design, and the actual bids we receive from the contractor. And so just picture yourself in that kind of real life situation when navigating the kind of common mistakes or the pitfalls of this section.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of really good points, Emily. And I said it and you said it again, and I want to say it again, but I want to be more blunt with how I say it this time is if you're studying for CE, you should go back into the B101 owner architect agreement and find the section that talks about what happens if the bids come back too high and get really clear about what that says. Make sure you understand that part of the contract because that's a topic that comes up pretty regularly. It comes up we wrote a lot of practice questions about that kind of stuff. Is when is the architect responsible for updating the documents without being paid versus when they should be paid, and what are the circumstances that cause that to happen? All right, let's talk about how to study for the CE exam. And here's the part where I give you my shameless self-promotion because we've created a comprehensive CE 101 course at the Young Architect Academy. We got 2 case studies that walk through some real world scenarios. We got flashcards. We have in-depth breakdowns of all the different project delivery methods and how the architects assist in each. We have over 200 practice questions, and I checked our spreadsheet. We wrote 70 questions specifically focused on section 1, which is what we're talking about today. We have video tutorials breaking down each objective. And recently, I created this new guide to help people use the Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice a little bit better. I call it the AHPP Companion. It really goes objective by objective and helps people get clearer about where to look for the right information inside the AHPP and what they should be looking for and how to read it a little bit more effectively and get more value from it. You and I all know that it's not the easiest book to read sometimes, but I mean, NCARB wrote the questions for this exam straight out of that book. So I don't know how anyone could study for this test and not use that book. We don't sell one-off courses. We have a membership that gives you access to all these materials because there's so much overlap between these different exams. So when you're studying for CE, you'll also be using our AI Contracts 101 course and our Building Codes 101 course as well to help you be better prepared for the CE exam. And the last thing I want to say about this is what makes the Young Architect approach different from other ARE prep companies is that we don't just teach you to memorize facts. We help you understand the concepts. And our goal is to really teach you how to teach this to yourself by giving you an active approach towards studying rather than just passively sitting on the couch and watching videos like it's Netflix. You can find all this information at youngarchitect.com/CE101 or just visit academy.youngarchitect.com. But beyond our CE course, I always tell our boot campers to do their own independent research. One of the biggest problems with people failing their exams is they rely too heavily on ARE prep companies to just give them all the answers. The better way to do this is to understand NCARB's objectives, because when they wrote those questions, they were looking at those exact words when they came brainstorm what they're going to be asking you on this test. It's to get clear about your objectives. It's to identify the gaps in your knowledge and to do your own research to fill in those gaps. Google things like, how do alternates work on construction documents? If you're unclear about something, you're going to get there way faster by researching based on what you know you need to know for the exam than by trying to memorize everything in a course. So my recommendations also include know your contracts. I'm not even going to look at the list. NCARB lists all the relevant contracts in their guidelines. And for CE, I would just say, go through that entire list. That's actually the outline of our Contracts 101 course is we took NCARB's list and broke every single contract down. So know your contracts. I'd say understand your project delivery methods inside and out, backwards and forwards. It's a concept that keeps coming up over and over and over and over again until you pass your first 3 exams. I'd say study real construction documentation in your office. That's something we do in the boot camp, is see if you can go find some pre-construction information from not your projects, someone else's projects. Grab your coworkers' files and read about the pre-bid meeting agenda or the bids and see what you can find from real projects. I always say that even, we have people read contracts in their office, like even if it's not AI contracts, read it anyway and see what you can learn from it. Studying real construction documentation is always helpful when it comes, I say especially for the CE exam. See if you could find any folders in your office about bidding, that would be really helpful. And then, there's a lot of stuff. We talked about the Architect's Handbook Professional Practice. I'm not going to get into it. See what that book says about the pre-construction phase. But the one amazing resource I would say for this section, for all sections in CE, is the Project Delivery Practice Guide. The Project Delivery Practice Guide from the Construction Specifications Institute is one of my favorite resources. It's the specification writers. They wrote this book and they do such a beautiful job of explaining what pre-construction is and the entire construction administration process. So I would probably make that one of your main resources for studying for this section. Now, people always say, Project Delivery Practice Guide, where do I get that book? And they look on Amazon and you see all these people on Amazon selling it for like $300. When if you just go to the Construction Specification Institute, you can buy it for like a fraction of that from the source, from the people that wrote the book. I can't recommend it enough. I think it's an amazing resource.
Yeah, I really like that book too. It's really well written. It's written by specification writers, It's not written by architects. I think a lot of information that we study is written by architects, so it's nice to have that fresh perspective from other people in the construction industry. So it gives you that fresh understanding of information about project delivery methods. And it's an easy read. I use it as a table of contents, really. I look up information throughout that book all the time. And I also just wanted to add one more thing to your recommendations of additional study methods. And I want to quote you, Mike, because you always say this in the ARE bootcamp, and I think it's really important that we are not just studying to pass an exam, right? Whether it's the ARE or the CDT exam or something else, we are studying and we are seeking out these licenses and certifications in order to be better and more responsible professionals in our career and just be more ethical in our practice. So keep that in mind. Obviously it's tempting to pick up a bunch of study materials and study guides and just, go hard and read through those. But an additional study method is to really take in this information through your own lens. Go to the original sources, seek out these books, right? Not just study guides or consolidated forms of study material. Google it, look stuff up at work or, online. That's really just through your own understanding and through your own words. And that's really going to help the information and the definitions to stick, because I really believe that breaking down the material for yourself is what's going to help you recalling that information on exam day. I think that's the best way to learn. And then practice through reviewing the study guides and the study resources, but also do your own level of research and understanding through your words.
Exactly. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up too. We've always at Young Architect, promoted a more active style of studying. I think 1 hour of active studying is worth more than 6 hours of mindless, passive studying. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, to wrap this up and bring it home, guys, section one is a really important part of CE exam. The architect's role changes with the delivery methods, so make sure you know these delivery methods well. Understand how contractors are selected and how to manage costs on a project. Know your AIA documents during procurement, the pre-construction phase. I just know them all, man. Make it easy. Just attack it. A lot of decisions in pre-construction have a major impact on the rest of the project. So get clear about how your role shifts from being the designer to being the advisor during this phase, because the pre-construction phase sets the tone for the entire construction process. And my last bit of encouragement is to focus on understanding the roles rather than memorizing facts. NCARB doesn't care about your ability to recite how many days it takes for the architect to return a submittal. More importantly, understand the concepts and roles. CE is one of my favorite exams. I love bidding. I have a lot of experience with it, and I love how all the rules, the relationships. I love the A201, but be patient with it. It takes time to wrap your head around the different parts of it and to really start to see the beauty and appreciate those documents for what they are.
I agree. And I think it's really important to stay excited about this material. This section of the exams, it's really about bridging the gap between the design world and the start of construction. And that can be really exciting. It can be, it's a lot to study, but imagine the roles and imagine all the people involved in making the project a reality and setting up on the site and putting shovels into the ground. This knowledge and understanding this section, it is really going to give you confidence on the day-to-day at work and even when you're doing job site visits. So, don't get too burdened with the amount of material to review. Try to stay excited about it. And as you work through some of this material, as easy or as challenging as it may be, if you stay excited about it, that may help that whole studying process be a lot easier.
Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Architect Exam Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Architect Exam Podcast. Ready to take your studying to the next level? Visit our online ARE Architecture School website at academy.youngarchitect.com to learn more about how we can help you. See you next time.